There was a struggling artist that received a phone call from a art store that had a bunch of his paintings. The owner of the store said, "I've got some good news and some bad news for you." And the artist said, "Man, I really could use some good news right now. I've had a rough time lately, so give me the good news." And the store owner said, the good news is that someone came into the store today and asked about your paintings. And they asked me if this artist were to die, would the value of those paintings increase? And I said, well, that's generally how it works. So absolutely, that more than likely, after this artist dies, his paintings will increase. He said, he bought everything I had of yours in the store. And the artist said, "Man, that is wonderful. I really needed something like that. But if that's the good news, what's the bad news?" The store owner said, "Well, the bad news is that evidently that was your doctor that came in." You know that something that is good news for one person can be bad news for someone else. I haven't even talked to Dick today. I've kind of been avoiding him because there was a play that happened yesterday in a football game that was good news for him, and Rusty's over there laughing too. Good news for those that are OU fans, and for those like me that are Longhorn fans, it's bad news. But what about the gospel? The word gospel, it means good news. And what is unique about the gospel is that the gospel isn't just simply good news for a certain segment of the world. The gospel isn't just good news whenever there are certain circumstances of life. But the gospel is intended to be good news for everyone. Right? You know the verse, John 3:16, that God so loved the whole world. God so loved the world. Not just God so loved those that gather at 4500 Wesley. Read of a Lifeway study, poll that they conducted as we prepare for the election, and they asked these people who they hope benefits from their prospective candidate that they are going to vote for. 61% of those that participated in this poll identify that those that they hope benefit are themselves, their family, or those across the nation that are most like them. It was less than like 25% that said that they hope that those who are disadvantaged or those who are overlooked, that those are the ones that benefit. And as I looked at that, I realized that that's the filter that we all kind of run life through. We are selfish by nature, and we want, if anything's going to benefit anybody, we want it to be about us. But the gospel is bigger than that. We started this study looking at the 7 letters that Jesus sends to 7 cities, 7 churches in Asia that we find in Revelation chapter 2 and 3. And in each of these letters, Jesus is going to speak directly to some circumstances that the church is facing. And last week we looked at the letter to the church at Ephesus. This church that is standing for truth. They are standing for what is right. They're refusing to compromise. But Jesus says that they have lost their first love. And he calls for them to return, repent, and do the things that they were doing before. This morning we're going to turn our attention to the letter to Smyrna, the church at Smyrna. In Revelation chapter 2, beginning in verse 8. To the angel of the church in Smyrna write, "These are the words of him who is the first and the last, who died and came to life again. I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich. I know about the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put some of you in prison to test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. Be faithful, even to the point of death. I will give you life as your victor's crown. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who is victorious will not be hurt at all by the second death. So as the message moves around from Ephesus on to Smyrna, Smyrna is another bustling city. It's a port city. It is a city that is extremely wealthy. The primary trade that takes place in the city of Smyrna is the trade of spices like myrrh. In fact, that's where it gets its name. Smyrna is from myrrh. This spice that was essential for the embalming, the burial practices. So you think about some of the burials, the deaths, like the death of Jesus, and as the women gather their spices on that Saturday morning, they go to the tomb. They're carrying with them myrrh, and you have to wonder, did they buy that myrrh from Smyrna? Or you have Lazarus and Jesus as he goes to that grave, that he would have been anointed with all of these oils and spices, and this city is flourishing because of that. It's a city that is very proud. They work hard because it was a city that was destroyed back in the 7th century BC, and it remained in ruins for about 400 years. It was rebuilt in the 3rd city. It was a city that took pride in its ability to pull itself up by its own bootstraps. That they were dead and they came alive again. And now they are flourishing. Think of the city of Philadelphia, if you will. And we have that fictional story of Rocky that kind of so kind of captures the spirit of that city, this group that gets knocked down time and time again, but they never count themselves out. This is the city of Smyrna. Perhaps that's why Jesus reveals himself in the way that he does. That I am the first and the last. I am the one who was dead and is raised again. And Jesus says to the church, I know you. I know your afflictions. Smyrna, this letter is unique in a couple of ways. One is that there is nothing negative that is said about this church. The only thing that is said is that they are suffering and that they are enduring, that they are being faithful in that. The second thing that is unique is that Jesus doesn't actually offer much hope in this. He doesn't say that things are going to get better. He just says, in fact, it's going to get worse. He uses this language of 10 days, and we don't know exactly what 10 days means, but historically we know that it didn't really last 10 days. We know that it actually lasted a lengthy period of time, that it got much worse. See, the Christians in Smyrna, they were a group that were of poor reputation, and they had limited resources. One of the dangers that I think we face as we look at these letters is we look at the suffering and the language that's used, and we just automatically draw a direct line to us and our circumstances. And so often we feel like we are being persecuted, that we are suffering. But what we are enduring is nothing like what they endured. The Christians in this city, they were in the minority. Last week, we talked about the imperial cult that had began to grow and Smyrna is one of the centers of that. They are very loyal to the emperor. They are very loyal to Rome. And tied to the imperial cult is all of the trade unions. You have to participate in the imperial cult. You have to participate in the worship in order to be a part of that union. So there are Christians that it's not that they're not able to gather together. They are actually losing their jobs because they refuse to say that Caesar is Lord. They cannot work in any kind of trade. No one will buy things from them because they are Christians. They are limited financially. And because they're a minority, they have a poor reputation. Minorities are often misunderstood. A common assumption in our culture is that if you are poor in America, it's because you are lazy and sinful. You have no work ethic and you're a drunkard. You just waste all of your money on all of these vices. And while that may be true some of the time, I know an awful lot of people that work a whole lot harder than I do. And they are righteous. And they're poor. I know of people that are lazy and they're wicked and they're sinful and they're quite wealthy. The world is not quite that simplistic. But these Christians, they're misunderstood. Some of the ways that they are misunderstood because of the language that they use. It was often thought in the first century that Christians were cannibals. Because they would talk about eating Jesus' body and drinking of his blood. And nobody took the time to engage in conversation with them. They just assume that what they're talking about is they are cannibals. They're actually eating. It was assumed that they were incestuous because they constantly referred to everyone as brothers and sisters. It was assumed that they engaged in orgies because they were always talking about these love feasts. That's what they referred to, what we talk about as communion or the Lord's table. They called that the love feast. And so they would see that, they would hear people talk about them. They would assume that they're just engaging in these orgies. Or it was assumed that Christians were arsonists. Because of the story that they would tell that we read about in Acts chapter 2 of Peter and the other apostles on that day and the fire of the Spirit. And perhaps that's why it was so easily believed when Emperor Nero, and he starts to kind of go crazy and he burns the city and he blames it on the Christians. Perhaps that's why it was believed that it was the Christians that were behind this, is because everyone just assumed that Christians, they love to play with fire. So here you have this group of believers, this group of followers in Jesus, and they have a very poor reputation in the city. They have limited resources, but Jesus looks at them and says, I know your poverty, but I also know you are quite rich. Christians in Smyrna are rich in the knowledge of God's heart. I said previously that Jesus doesn't offer any hope, or very little hope, of immediate change to their circumstances. It says that don't be afraid of what you are about to suffer, that the devil, in verse 10, will put some of you in prison to test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. It's going to get worse before it gets better. I read a study about hope that was taken from this experiment that was conducted on rats, and it was a rather cruel experiment. They took these rats and they put them in a bucket of water that there was no way for them to escape, and they started to time how long they would be able to swim before they just gave up. And then after they kind of measured out how long it was possible for rats to swim before their bodies just physically gave out, then they did something really cruel. They would then, right before that time lapsed, they would grab these rats and they would bring them out and they would dry them off for just a little bit, and then they would put them back in the water. And they would see how long they could swim. And they would wait, and they would pull them out again. What they discovered is say, for example, that the rats could swim for 3 hours. If they pulled them out at 2 hours and 59 minutes, they dried them off, put them back in, that they could go on endlessly in that manner. That there was something about the hope of being delivered that allowed them to keep going. And the hope that Jesus provides is not that the suffering is going to change, but he presents this picture of who he is. I am. I am the first and the last. I am the one who died and now lives. Jesus harkens back to language that was introduced to Moses. If you've grown up in church, you know the story. Moses sees this bush that is on fire and it's not being consumed, and he's kind of curious, so he walks over to it and he discovers that God is there. God wants to send him to go and deliver the Israelites. And Moses says, I've done that. I've tried that before and it didn't work out. So why will these people believe me now? And God says, just tell them, I am. Little bizarre of a way to introduce yourself, isn't it? I mean, when's the last time you just met somebody and they said their name and you just said, I am? Just stopped there. Right? You expect that it's going to be followed up by something. That's just the beginning of the sentence. But God, he just says, I am. Then you turn over to the Gospel of John, and Jesus consistently uses that language, I am. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the door for the sheep. I am the gate to the pen. I am the resurrection and the life. Jesus says that as you enter into suffering, as things get harder for you, you need to know the heart of God. Do you remember the words of the psalmist? The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for His name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. The psalmist acknowledges that dark valleys will come, and you're going to have to go through those seasons of life. But if you know the heart of God, don't be afraid. Do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. While I don't know that we can draw just a straight line from the suffering of a group of Christians in the first century to what we are facing today, I can't deny the reality of what's taking place. That Dick shared with me Thursday, I believe it was, a study conducted by the Barna Group that they initially conducted in 2000 and they repeated in 2019. And the 19 years between those two studies, the number of practicing Christians, those who claim to be Christians, and they say that their faith is important for the way that they live, and that they have attended church once in the last month, at least one time in the last month. That's their definition of a practicing Christian. The number of practicing Christians has halved in the last 19 years. There's only 1/4 of America that fits that definition today. Now, there's a lot more that fit into the category of a non-practicing Christian. They still would identify themselves as a Christian, but they don't gather together. They're not formed in a community of any sort. And as that progresses, as we have more generations, more people that they grow up outside of the church, they're not going to share the same kind of values and worldview that you have. It won't be long before declaring a belief in the sanctity of marriage is declared hate speech. And I don't say this to scare you, but we can look at Europe, we can look at Canada, we can look at other places in the United States that are further down this road that we are now going down. And let's be honest, it's quite possible that has been sped up by the pandemic. Look around you, and we do not have as many people in this space today as we had last year at this time. And it's not clear whether or not some of those are going to come back. And so the question that the letter to the church of Smyrna forces us to ask is, will we allow rejection to drain our faith tank? We enjoy the experience of being around like-minded people. But what if that changes? It is important that we come to know God before suffering hits in order to understand suffering in light of His love, rather than interpreting His love through the lens of our suffering. It's interesting that one of those men that is in the gathering that would have heard this letter read, a man that is Christian history tells us he was actually discipled by John. He would become an elder in the church of Smyrna. His name was Polycarp. Polycarp, just a couple of decades later, would be tracked down by hunters to be delivered over because of his faith. And whenever they found him, he just simply asked that he be granted the privilege of praying for an hour before he turned himself in. And so those guards, they stood there, they listened to him pray, not just for 1 hour, but for 2 hours. And it said that some of those actually even became Christians. They were converted because of this man's prayer. He was taken down to the town square in Smyrna, and he was given the opportunity to recant his faith in Jesus Christ. And if he did, he would live. But Polycarp declared that Jesus has never failed him in 65 years, and so he cannot decry his faith. And he became the 12th martyr in the city of Smyrna. You may be right to fear for the future, but sometimes suffering is a good thing. Sometimes being poor is more. Paul would write in Philippians chapter 3, I want to know Christ. Yes, to know the power of His resurrection and the participation in His sufferings, becoming like Him in His death. Those are great and powerful words. I want to know Christ. to know the power of his resurrection. The true story of the rise of the phoenix isn't this Greek mythology, but it is Jesus Christ, who is the first and the last, the one who was dead and now is alive. This morning, I invite you to come to him. Our shepherds will be at the back of the worship center to receive you. I'll be at the front. If you'd like prayers, or if you'd like to come into Christ, we invite you to come as we stand to sing together.